19th century, multiple colonial powers had realized that Africa served as a good source of natural resources and additional profit. Europeans had actually been in Africa since the 15th century, establishing exploration campaigns and trade posts along the coast. Eventually, each empire also realized that they would likely be competing with their neighboring European powers, and therefore needed to make some claims to the lands they wished to utilize. This prompted a period generally referred to as the Scramble for Africa. When the scramble began, Europeans had already reached the continent, driven by financial and political reasons. The European leaders knew that it would only be a matter of time before war would break out between them if some type of deal was not made as to who would control which parts of the continent. 13 European nations met with each other and the United States for the Berlin Conference. The conference began on November 15, 1884, and didn't end until February 26, 1885, and resulted in the subsequent Berlin Act. The region of modern-day Congo that had already been occupied by the Belgians was confirmed to be under Belgian possession. Areas of free trade for all was set up around the Niger and Congo rivers and the Congo Basin and Lake Malawi, and it was agreed that any European entity who took land along the African coast would have to inform the other powers of this action. Now, the door was open for any and all of these imperial powers to start taking over the continent. Italy was one of these empires, and quickly set its sights on Ethiopia after beginning to establish what would become its Eritrean colony. Moving to expand this colony more.
I'm all about things Africa in my geopolitical AK. That's why I decided to show this, because it has to do with why Ethiopia is the only country in Africa that was never colonized.
The Italians sent their Special Corps of Africa into the port town of Massawa, was at the time under the authority of the Ethiopian Empire in 1887. The latter initially sent a warning to the Italian officials that they were in violation of a treaty that had been signed between Ethiopia, known then as Abyssinia, Britain, and Egypt, but the warning was not heeded. Instead, Italy decided to double down and began to prepare for a battle at the Sahati fortification with 167 Italian troops alongside 1,000 locals. The town's governor, Ras Alula Ngida, was not even slightly tolerant of this move.
Very interesting.
And decided to outright attack the fortification and its inhabitants.
Right now is known as Eritrea. This whole area here goes down, and then there's a little small country there called Djibouti, because Ethiopia has no access to the Red Sea whatsoever right now.
This risky decision resulted in a tragic number of casualties for the Ethiopians, with only a few Italians being injured and none killed. The attacking troops had been no match for the garrison's cannon and rifles, and were shortly forced to retreat, while some still remained alive. Still, the Italians were now low on ammunition, and further felt need for reinforcements, which resulted in about 550 additional troops being sent to the fortification. Thanks to his spies, Ras Alula was given a heads up and quickly gathered a fresh army to march back to the garrison before the reinforcements could arrive. This time, the Ethiopians greatly outnumbered the Italians, who still had superior weaponry but low ammunition. The battle raged on for a few hours before the ammo finally ran out, and the Ethiopians routed their enemies, almost wiping them out entirely. This considerably angered the surviving Italians and their authorities, which turned the newfound war into not only a political struggle, but also a personal vendetta. Now, at the end of January, Italy voted to send a massive new force back to Eritrea to avenge their recent defeat, while the Ethiopian emperor, Johannes IV, decided to pull his troops out of the area for the time being. This ended up being a wise move, as the Italians were suddenly plagued by disease and forced to return home by March. The rest of the year was marked by a period of shady politics and back-and-forth alliances. The Italians hoped to bribe the rivals of Johannes into partnerships with them, while the emperor himself looked to maintain unity within the region so he would have support against the invading threat. Ultimately, with the death of Johannes as he fought elsewhere against the maddest Sudanese threat, the Italians found some degree of success, as the monarch was succeeded by Menelik of Shiva, whom they had previously formed an alliance with. This brought about the treaty in which Italy's new possessions throughout the establishment of Italian Eritrea were recognized by the Ethiopian Empire. Still, though Ethiopia did lose some of the territories it had previously claimed, Ethiopia itself was yet to be touched by Italy's colonial hand. This was not the end of Italy versus Ethiopia, though, and Europe had surely not given up so easily on colonizing the remaining African free states. In fact, Italy at this point actually believed Ethiopia to be an Italian protectorate via the Wichal Treaty. In the Italian translation, this clause had been quite clear, but for some reason, in the Amharic translation, it was not, and instead seemed to confirm Ethiopia's full autonomy. The Italians claimed that Menelik surely knew he was signing a modified copy of the treaty, but that doesn't appear to be the case, as he had sent letters to both Germany and Britain in 1889 and was only informed by them that he could not have diplomatic relations with any European power aside from Italy due to the rules established back at the Berlin Conference. This prompted newfound tensions between Italy and its supposed protectorate as Menelik denounced the hidden clause of the treaty and worked to consolidate his own power throughout Ethiopia. This ushered in a new era of Ethiopian nationalism, partly fueled by a widespread anti-Italy sentiment, but also through the unity encouraged by the new emperor. When Italy began to seize small territories around the Ethiopian-Eritrean border, they expected some of Menelik's rivals to join their campaign and fight against him, but instead, they all rushed to the emperor's side. This time, Italy's strategy to divide and conquer quickly crumbled as the Ethiopians, regardless of previous internal feuds, were determined to unite and maintain their independence from the Europeans. Ironically, Menelik was also now better equipped thanks to the Europeans.
By the way, a little side note here. Right now, Ethiopia and this country down here in the bottom right, Somalia, are probably going to be going to war real soon. And right now also Sudan is bothering Ethiopia, but the same thing will probably happen. Ethiopia will unite and probably attack Somalia, kick their butt, and that'll end that.
The Italians had provided some weaponry to rivals of the crown, including Menelik himself prior to Johannes's death, that they expected would be used against the Ethiopian authority, in addition to further military supplies from France and Britain, who hoped to keep Italy's expansion in check. When a new war finally broke out between Italy and Ethiopia, the fresh nationalism and unity of the latter would eventually prove itself to be the key to victory. Though some military aid was given from Russia, it was the joint efforts of the Ethiopians that eventually defeated the Italians at the Battle of Adwa. Following this decisive clash, the Treaty of Addis Ababa was signed in October of 1896 and forced the Italians to recognize Ethiopian sovereignty. The aftermath of these events and the impressive nature in which Ethiopia had proven itself as an independent nation strengthened its ties with Russia and prompted both Britain and France to spark friendlier relations. This played a significant role in the safety of Ethiopia's sovereignty and went far in deterring other European imperial powers from making any moves against the Free State. Still, Italy was not quite done. In 1935, the Second Italo-Ethiopian War broke out after Italy decided to invade.
That was actually a couple of years before World War II, believe it or not.
Ethiopia yet again. This time, though, Italy was actually successful to a certain extent. Ethiopia was annexed and united with the surrounding Italian possessions of Somaliland and Eritrea to create Italian East Africa, which lasted until the Italians switched sides in the Second World War and eventually signed a treaty in 1947 that acknowledged Ethiopia's independence and required Italy.
So it lasted 3 years, is what they're saying, from 33 to 36, 37, the beginning of World War II.
To pay $25 million in reparations. So, Ethiopia was never colonized, in part due to the underestimation of the entire continent's possibilities by Europe, partially because of the Berlin Conference and the limitations it put on other empires in the region, but largely due to the resilience and determination of the locals. This region was more developed than other African territories, and it had more contact with Muslim and European kingdoms throughout the centuries, while many other African tribes in other regions were isolated. Another factor that contributed to this outcome is Italy. Now, beyond the jokes that have been made about the Italian armies in some contexts, at the end of the 19th century, Italy was a recently unified country, and its experience in colonialism was pale compared to that of Great Britain or France. We cannot know what would have happened if one of these two countries had been more captivated by Ethiopian territory, but it is a factor that we must take into account. The Ethiopian nationalism and Menelik's skillful unification and use of European weaponry against the Europeans were pillars in the fight for freedom of the Ethiopians. Without those factors, history likely would have gone.
Anyhow, there we go, a little history of Ethiopia and why it was never colonized. Another thing you might want to have noticed, if you look at a map of Africa, you'll see that oh shit, let me get off the shared screen here. There we go. If you look at a map of Africa, Ethiopia is all mountainous. And they've just discovered Ethiopian white opal and a couple other natural gemstones in the Tanzania, Mozambique, Ethiopian mountain range. So they're actually going to, with this new world direction that the world's going in, they might actually have some real good mining opportunities that you might want to look at for possible investments. Not that I'm a financial advisor or any of this is financial advice, but it is sound advice. With some new business popping up, and Ethiopian white opal is not that old. It wasn't discovered that long ago. It's still new to the industry. So there's a lot of opportunities left there, along with other gems that they're finding. I think zygot or something like that. A couple other natural gems that they're discovering in that area because of the mountain formation in that area. Anytime you have mountains, you have a lot of tectonic movement underneath those mountains. That's why they got pushed up, and that's typically where you find a lot of your gems and minerals. And Ethiopia is nothing but mountains. So I anticipate them having a pretty good future when it comes to mining. Anyhow, happy Halloween, everyone, and hope you're having a good night. Anyone dress up this evening? No? That's right, 79. I know you're always dressed up. Well, I don't have too much more. I just had that little bit I wanted to throw out. I didn't expect a lot of people to show up here because it is Halloween. So I told you you'd be dressed up. Usually you'd just be wearing like shoes. Ha! I know that was a shitty one, but that's what I could think of off the top of my head. Anyhow, I hope you guys have a happy Halloween. And thank you for stopping by. I appreciate you. And if you want, I'll be back Sunday. Thank you again, and good evening.